Ukraine is inflicting these 39,000 casualties. The average lifespan for a Russian soldier has been measured as 20 minutes. This has given Vladimir Putin a real dilemma. He's running out of manpower. This is a fantastic tactic by the Ukrainians. Ukraine is turning up the pain for Russia's middle class. It is destroying Russia's ability to launch attacks against Ukraine. As Russians are urged to drive calmly to save fuel, and President Zelensky shuffles his military commanders, there are major updates from the front line. I'm Philip Ingram, and this is Battle Plans Exposed. We're well over halfway through the year, and it's fair to say Vladimir Putin's spring and summer offensives are complete and utter disasters. Russia still has over 5,000 square kilometres of Donetsk left to capture, yet it has taken just 97 square kilometres. Putin set a new deadline of December the 31st for its capture. Now that's the 15th time he has moved the goalpost. At this rate of advance, it's estimated it will take Russian forces 14 years to capture it completely. Moscow lost at least 30,000 troops every month between January and May, and while June hit a record high of 39,000 casualties, that's 39,000 dead and wounded. Tactically, Ukraine is launching stunning counterattacks in key sectors. Operationally, Kyiv has wrapped up a 40-day campaign that tore up Russia's rear-line logistics. Away from the battlefield, Ukraine has struck in a series of assassinations, sending a clear message to the Kremlin: we know where you are. Severe fuel shortages are biting ordinary Russians, forcing some onto bicycles. Petrol quality is dropping and civil unrest is growing. Politically, Vladimir Putin is trying to downplay these economic problems despite the fuel crisis and broader decline. A massive question looms: will Russia be forced to mobilise? Now, before we analyse all of this, let's look at what's been happening on the front lines. Now, in our first clip, Russia's equivalent of Amazon has gone up in smoke, delivering over $1 billion of damage in a prime attack. This one is really going to hurt. What's it called? Well, it's Wildberries in Russia. These warehouses help handle 52% of online retail in the country. Thousands of independent sellers store their entire inventory inside these hubs. Overnight, their stock and livelihood has gone. But it's not only clothes, phone chargers and books that they sell. Wildberries has a more sinister stock available. Military gear such as body armour and drone components are listed on the platform. Pro-war bloggers say volunteers rely on the site to buy kit that is then sent to the front line. Targeting these ginormous warehouses is an intriguing shift in Ukraine's deep strike strategy. As Zelensky put it, we are quite justly bringing the war back home to Russia. Now, there's a smile on my face when I talk about this being the Amazon, the big hubs. But actually what it is doing is a number of different things. It's making the average Russian much more aware of the war coming home to affect them. They can't get their Wildberries Prime, their equivalent of Amazon Prime. I don't know whether that exists, deliveries on time. But it's small businesses that use just-in-time supply. They're using the equivalent of drop shipping. The stocks that they buy are held in these warehouses, but they're not insured. So whenever the warehouses go up, the small businesses are taking the cost. The number of videos that are appearing on social media saying that businesses have gone under because they can't afford anything anymore is shocking. And then we've got the military effect. This is a supply chain getting components from overseas, and China in particular, into the Russian military manufacturing capability, whether they be small industries that are building FPV drones or the components for that, or whether it be groups that are buying stuff to get that body armour, those bits of uniform, those helmets, the other things that are needed for the front lines. It's all affecting that. And it seems that Ukraine is now on a systematic campaign of destroying these warehouses. Not one has been hit, two have been destroyed, a third has been hit, and I suspect that the number of others that exist across Russia are going to meet a similar fate in the coming days and weeks. We can tell from the flames in this, and you can tell from the area that they cover, that these are very similar when it comes to the effect that there is on the ground, to Ukraine hitting Russian oil refineries. The fire seems to be as intense as it rips through these huge warehouses because of the number of plastic components, flammable components, and everything else that seem to be stored in there. We've seen similar fires as the oil refineries get hit, the oil storage tanks get hit, and the oil spills out, spreading fire over a huge area. This is significant. In our second clip, here we have a genius aerial tactic to strike deep behind Russian lines. Ukraine is taking to the skies using high-altitude tethered balloons to launch strike drones mid-air. Known as aerostats, these giant balloons lift a Hornet strike drone up to 8 kilometers into the air. The balloon carries the drone 26 miles away from its launch site before releasing it to start its engine. Obviously, the tether is released like meteorological balloons that these really are do once they get to the right level. If these were launched using ground catapult launches, they would burn massive amounts of battery power during takeoff and climb. By skipping that initial launch phase, the drone used 5% of its battery during transit. That leaves almost its entire energy reserve packed and ready for the main strike. Ukrainian operators estimate this tactic could double the Hornet's range from 90 miles to nearly 190 miles. Also, aerostats are difficult to detect for Russian air defenses. It's a simple adaptation that gives Kyiv a cheap, deep strike weapon to target Russian staging posts across the country. It shows how Ukraine is continuously adapting low-cost technology to strike deep into Russian-held territory. Russian state media is already sounding the alarm over these high-altitude balloon tactics. Interestingly, thanks to prevailing winds that blow from the west to the east, so from Ukraine towards Russia, Russia is unable just to copy this tactic in a straightforward way. Now, this shows the ingenuity that the Ukrainians are applying. And it's that level of ingenuity that they're applying to everything across the front line and seem to be bringing in more and more new ways of delivering weapons further into Russia. Russia's concerned. They don't know how to deal with this. They don't know how to react to it. And they're being caught effectively with their pants down. Now, on the front line, battlefield robotics are becoming essential for rescue missions. Ukrainian forces are deploying uncrewed ground vehicles to pull civilians out of high-risk strike zones. In this operation, a robotic platform was sent to evacuate 2 elderly civilians trapped near the front line. That's without risking more human lives. In true Russian style, their forces targeted the rescue vehicle, hitting it with 2 FPV kamikaze drones during the run. You can see the moment the drones strike the vehicle along the track. Despite the explosions, both civilians survived unharmed inside the trailer. The platform took the hits, kept the civilians safe, and a second robotic vehicle finished the extraction. Using ground robotics for evacuation cuts the risk to rescue teams whilst keeping frontline logistics moving. But there's something else to notice about this. These extraction vehicles quite clearly had a red cross on them. We can see from the Ukrainian drone that was monitoring the extraction that red cross can be easily seen. The Russian FPV drones will have seen that. And to attack a vehicle that is being used for humanitarian reasons on the battlefront by any weapon system is a war crime, quite simply. This is yet another war crime that has been well documented that can be added to the ever-growing list of what Russia has done against Ukraine in this conflict. So in our next clip, speaking of logistics, this footage is from a Ram 2X strike drone targeting Russian military supplies on the Zaporizhia front. Look at this target tracking software in action as it's locking onto a moving Russian supply truck. Ukrainian operators are systematically hunting down convoys along key transport routes. The Ram 2X carries a high explosive warhead specifically designed to destroy heavy military transport vehicles and fuel tankers. You can see the precision strike here as the drone slams directly into a supply vehicle parked near a staging area. Targeting fuel and ammunition trucks before they reach the front line leaves entire frontline units stranded. This relentless pressure on southern logistics networks is a crucial element of Kyiv's strategy. And that crucial element of key strategy is starving Russia's ability to push combat supplies, fuel, oil, water, food, but most importantly, ammunition forward to the front line. So not only have they got troops going forward without armoured support or anything else, but they haven't got the bullets because Ukraine is destroying them before they get there. And the other thing that we should notice about what's going on in this video is if you look at the resolution that there is from the pictures, you can see the vehicles that are being hit very clearly. You can see the individuals that are running away. You can see the individuals that don't make it away. They can be counted. And this is what the Ukrainians are doing. Every attack, the video is analysed. The numbers of vehicles that are getting destroyed, the types of vehicles that are getting destroyed are being counted. The number of personnel that get killed, they don't move again. The number of personnel that get away and the number of personnel that have to hobble away or get carried away are being counted. This is why Ukraine's understanding of the casualties that it's inflicting on Russia is very good indeed. And finally, in a massive embarrassment for Moscow, Russia's newest stealth fighter jet has crashed near the capital. The fifth generation Su-57 went down near the village of Lutsinyo in the Moscow region. Russian reports confirm the pilot ejected before the aircraft hit the ground, and you can just see that in this video. The crash delivers a heavy blow to the Kremlin's Air Force, which relies on the Su-57 as its flagship combat jet. Each Su-57 costs up to £38 million. That's $50 million if we're working in US currency. That's to build. And with the full operational package valued at over £75 million or $100 million, it is a very valuable asset to lose. Moscow holds only a tiny fleet of these top-tier stealth jets in active service. Losing a top-tier stealth jet so close to Moscow raises serious questions about maintenance and the technical failures inside Putin's military aviation sector. And whilst we call it a fifth-generation aircraft, it has got all of that in its technical specifications and the way it looks. But actually, from a personal perspective, I would probably expect there to be a lot of third generation or fourth generation or maybe earlier equipment and technology inside this jet, because the Russians seem to go for something that looks good, talks good, but isn't necessarily as good as they make it out to be. To start with, let's take a closer look at what's been going on around the fortress belt located in Donetsk. That's this region of Ukraine. Kostyantynivka in the south, at the tip of the fortress belt, remains a hotly contested grey zone. A lot of debate as to who has captured it or who hasn't captured it. What is clear is no matter what the Russians say, because they say they've got it, they don't. Ukraine still controls large proportions of the city. This is one of the most vital defensive battles along the entire Eastern Front. What is the fortress belt? Well, the fortress belt are effectively these four cities: Kostyantynivka, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk and Lyman. And it's building on a defensive line that Ukraine started with Bakhmut and Pokrovsk beforehand. And the Russians are focused on them. Ukraine has turned these into fantastically defended, built-up areas. A large proportion of the populations in them, as the Russians start to attack, have been evacuated. There are some civilians that decide to stay. But what Ukraine is doing is forcing Russia to fight street by street, building by building, as they try to capture these built-up areas. Why the Russians are fixated on built-up areas, I do not know, because it's in their doctrine when they come across effectively a porcupine defence like that to try and bypass it, to ignore it. The Russians seem to become fixed on it. And what are the Ukrainians doing with this as the Russians attack? They're inflicting huge numbers of casualties. Russian troops are pushing hard from the south and the east to try and cut off supply lines to the eastern garrisons. But Ukrainian engineers have built thick defensive networks, including anti-tank ditches, minefields and concrete bunkers. We've seen small Russian infantry groups trying to plant flags inside Kostyantynivka for quick propaganda wins. And I've talked about this for several weeks now. But we're hearing reports of an incredible counterattack underway just north of Kostanivka near Lyman. We reported previously of Ukraine's counterattack to take Yampil, but something bigger is brewing. Russian forces have made a spearhead and seized the village of Shandrai Holovi, and that's up around here. This was with the goal of cutting off supply lines from there into Lyman. However, this has left them vulnerable to a counterattack. Ukraine could be executing what every commander fears, and that's encirclement. Ukraine is attacking behind where the Russians have said that they've captured and trying to cut off the Russians in this salient. So as the Russians have said that they have captured here, the Ukrainians are attacking in from the north, and it is reported by the Ukrainians, this has not been confirmed, that they've captured a village of Zelena Dolenya, which is in this sort of area here. Now, if they have done, that will be creating panic amongst the Russian commanders here, because it's in danger of them being encircled and cut off. Once they get cut off, then, as we've seen with the Ukrainians beforehand, they starve them out. They then capture or kill the entire number of Russian troops that are forward. We don't know how many have gone forward here. Reporting at the moment is confused across the front line, but this exemplifies what's happening. It also exemplifies the fact that Ukraine seems to have the initiative at this tactical level and has the initiative in where Russia's main effort is, because Russia's main effort is trying to capture this fortress belt. They keep saying they've captured Kostanivka. As I said earlier, they haven't. The Russians have said that they've captured Lyman. The Ukrainians have pushed them out. The Russians are now saying that they're threatening Lyman from the north here. They haven't. And the Ukrainians are now saying they're threatening the Russian advances here. They could well be doing that. The front line is confused, but Ukraine has the initiative. As ever, there's a fog of war and the details remain somewhat fragmented. Russian mill bloggers are raising the alarm. The reports show Ukrainian uncrewed ground drones sweeping through the sector to clear Russian positions. Does Ukraine have enough reserves to see this counter-strike through? Time will tell, but we'll monitor the situation closely and bring you any updates that we get. So why does Putin want the Donetsk Oblast so much? Well, these cities, these four cities, are the last real defensive lines that there are between this part of Donetsk and the Donetsk boundary. And the Donetsk boundary is the last area where there's any defense between there and Kyiv. Vladimir Putin would accept and try and convince the Russian people that he has won the conflict if he captures this, because it is part of this disputed Donbass region up to the border there. And the Donbass region is the region where there was primarily Russian-speaking people. And Putin has changed his rationale for the war to being one where he wanted to destroy Ukraine primarily, to one where he wants to protect the areas that he sees as Russian. And of course, Vladimir Putin has brought this region under the Russian constitution. He held an illegal referenda 18 months, 2 years ago, where he said that the people of the disputed Donbass voted to be part of Russia and then changed the Russian constitution to bring it in. So as far as Putin's concerned, from a legal perspective, he sees this as Russian and therefore he has to capture it. He's not succeeding militarily. And this is why every time there are peace negotiations going on, his criteria in those peace negotiations are that Ukraine must give up this whole area. If Ukraine give up that whole area, there's nothing to stop the Russians at some stage in the future heading towards Kyiv. Ukraine has put so much effort into these areas and protecting them, and the people of these cities recognize themselves as Ukrainian. Zelensky has turned around and said he will never give these territories up. And speaking to the average Ukrainian, they say that under no circumstances should Ukraine give up any territory to the Russians. So this is the primary area where Ukraine is inflicting these 39,000 casualties in the last month onto the Russians. In the last 2 or 3 months, the number of Russian dead and wounded has exceeded the number of individuals that Russia has managed to recruit and bring into the Russian forces. The average lifespan for a Russian soldier being pushed forward to the front line has been measured as 20 minutes. Yes, you heard that right, 20 minutes, not 20 hours or 20 days, 20 minutes. This has given Vladimir Putin a real dilemma. He's running out of manpower. He has not brought a general mobilization in across Russia, and that is something that he's almost certainly considering at the moment. However, he's not going to do that before the Russian elections coming up in this autumn. If he wins the elections, and I think if is a certainty for Vladimir Putin, and he gets the numbers that he wants, and I think that's a certainty, then there's a real potential that Vladimir Putin will bring in a more general mobilization across Russia. And what are the indicators for that at the moment? They're tiny little indicators at the moment, but subtle changes in the language coming out of Moscow. The Russian Kremlin spokesperson, Peskov, turned around and called the special military operation a war. He's now described it as an existential war, not just against Ukraine, but against NATO and against the EU. Vladimir Putin has turned around and openly discussed the pain that has been caused against the Russian people by the deep strikes that Ukraine is successfully executing inside Russian territory. These subtle changes in language would suggest that Putin may be preparing the Russian population for a more general mobilization. Only time will tell, but we'll be watching it for you. Wars are decided not just on the battlefield. Strikes thousands of kilometers from the front line can determine the victor. Let's look at the operational level of this war now. So forget holding the line. The Security Service of Ukraine, the SBU, unleashed a kinetic storm deep behind enemy lines. Signed off directly by Vladimir Zelensky, this 40-day strategic blitz slammed energy facilities, airbase hangars, and shadow fleet oil tankers across Russia and into the Sea of Azov and into the Black Sea. The objective was simple: collapse the front line from the rear. By systematically strangling the Kremlin's economy and knocking out irreplaceable strategic assets, Kyiv is cutting off frontline combat power and accelerating Putin's decline. Here's how this 40-day campaign unfolded on the ground. First of all, satellite and drone footage showing smoke rising over massive Omsk oil processing complex in Siberia. Look at the distance of this strike. Ukrainian drones flew for more than 12 hours to reach Omsk in Siberia. Siberia is the other side of the Ural Mountains. At 1,800 miles from the border, this 1,500-mile flight path is equivalent to 3 trips across the length of Great Britain. The attack halted operations at Russia's largest fuel producer, deepening domestic shortages and forcing export bans. It proves to Moscow that industrial sites, once protected by sheer distance, now sit directly in Kyiv's crosshairs. The Ural Mountains, that sort of distance, was during the Cold War with Russia or with the Soviet Union. By NATO, it was seen as the limit of our exploitation, the furthest our aircraft, our missiles and everything else could get to. Ukrainians are showing they can go well beyond that now. Zelensky confirmed the shift, stating Ukraine has completely eliminated the concept of a safe Russian strategic rear. And that strategic rear, as I said, during the Cold War was built up on the eastern side of the Ural Mountains. That is where Russia had its depots for all of its spare military equipment. That's where Russia stored its long-range missiles and ammunition before bringing it forward to what would have been a Cold War frontline. That's where Russia has a lot of its defense industrial base. That's where Russia has a lot of its oil refining and other capabilities to be able to supply things forward. It's now lost that protection of those Ural Mountains. Ukraine is showing that everywhere is touchable and nowhere is untouchable. Again, if we go back in history and we look at how Russia has defended itself, let's go to the Second World War. Russia drew the German forces through Ukraine, right up to the outskirts of Moscow, bringing them forward fast so that the logistic lines were being stretched too far. Remember, logistics. What is Ukraine doing? Ukraine is attacking Russia's logistics, but attacking it from within Russia to stop it being able to reinforce logistically into its occupied territories inside Ukraine, stopping the logistics from keeping Russia moving normally and affecting everything. Ukraine is taking the tactics that the old Soviet Union used of slash and burn and applying that slash and burn into Russian territory. This is something they have never seen before. So, second strike, repeated drone strikes slammed into the Moscow oil refinery at Kapotynya, less than 10 miles from the Kremlin. Ukrainian drone hits the complex in multiple waves, knocking out major production lines. A UFO was spotted as the lid was blown off an oil tank. Video captured a Russian surface-to-air missile meant to take out an overhead Ukrainian drone miss and fly directly into one of the refinery storage tanks, causing a powerful blast that launched the circular roof into the sky in a mushroom cloud before it crashed to the ground, giving that impression of a UFO taking off. It was quite a spectacular sight to see. The damage directly worsened Russia's mounting domestic fuel crisis, bringing flames to the capital skyline, and it shatters Putin's claims that the war remains far away. The third example is hundreds of miles inside Russia. Ukrainian drones penetrated deep air defences to strike the Engels airbase. Satellite imagery reveals the scorched wreckage of a destroyed Tu-95MS heavy bomber. These strategic bombers represent Russia's airborne nuclear triad and are entirely irreplaceable. Losing a nuclear-capable aircraft directly on its home runway is a massive tactical humiliation for Moscow. Ukrainian naval drones targeted the sanctioned Shadow Fleet tanker Blue near Yalta, hitting Putin's illegal oil exports. By knocking out over 40% of Russia's oil refining capacity, Kyiv has proven its long-range strike capability can reach deep behind enemy lines. And it's this balance of hitting military targets, the airfields, hitting targets that are supporting military operations, the oil refineries, but also supporting civilian oil and gas supply is significant. It is bringing the fight home. It is destroying Russia's ability to launch attacks against Ukraine. It is destroying Russia's ability to reinforce or resupply its troops that are attacking into Ukraine. This is a slow tactic at the operational level to help what is going on at a tactical level and will help reinforce Ukraine's green shoots of success of Ukraine beginning to wrestle the initiative at that level. Another airbase was targeted. This time forces from the 15th Artillery Reconnaissance Brigade targeted Kalino airfield in the Kursk region. Overhead footage shows a strike drone diving directly beside a parked MiG-29 fighter jet. Moscow deploys these £20 million jets specifically to hunt down Ukrainian long-range attack drones. Ukrainian assets also knocked out the Pantsir S-1 air defence system guarding the airfield. It didn't see them coming. And this is blinding local air defence coverage and it leaves high-value targets across the region wide open to follow up strikes. On the naval front, what's this footage from a Ukrainian Mamai naval drone operating in the Black Sea? Russian helicopters throw heavy machine gun fire and aerial bombs at the drone on its approach. The pilot weaves through the defensive barrage and rams straight into a Sumac-class tanker. This vessel belonged to Putin's illegal Shadow Fleet, moving crude oil past Western sanctions to fund the war. Damaging the ship directly chokes off a critical financial pipeline feeding the Kremlin war chest. Next, to pull off these deep strikes, you have to blind the enemy first. Look at this precision strike taking out strategic radar installations in occupied Crimea. Once those radar eyes are darkened, Ukrainian forces smashed the Begravno airbase and blew up a massive ammunition depots nearby. Without air defence coverage, Russian repair hubs and supply lines in the south were left totally defenceless. This initial operation of destroying air defences is called SIAD, suppression of enemy air defences. Blind the enemy, stop them being able to attack your air assets, and you then bring the strike assets in that carry out the effect that you want to on the ground. But these air defence assets are hugely valuable and take many years to build. if Russia's got the capacity to rebuild them because it can't get the key components because of the sanctions that it faces. This is a fantastic tactic by the Ukrainians to completely degrade Russia's air defences over a wide area. In this next clip, Ukrainian assets hit 4 critical military transport ferries, including the Yasek and the Maria, and incinerated the fuel terminal at the port of Kravats. By neutralising these transport ferries and knocking out the radar network across Crimea, Ukraine has effectively converted the Black Sea into a logistics death trap. Russian forces on the front line are now facing acute supply shortages. And lastly, we have the warehouses that Russian consumers rely on for their goods. By targeting these large logistic nodes, Ukraine is turning up the pain for Russia's middle class, who have so far been unaffected by the war. So what we're seeing here is a fundamental shift in strategy. Ukraine is using high-tech precision tools and relentless asymmetric tactics to hit Russia where it hurts most. Its war chest and its supply lines. When you take out nuclear bombers on their own runways and you burn tankers financing the invasion, you render the Kremlin's fortified rear completely useless. And this is the perfect example of how Ukraine has the initiative and is developing that initiative at the operational level. That operational level, stopping Russia's ability to continue to reinforce what Russian troops are trying to achieve at a tactical level. It's impacting Russia tactically, and Ukraine is now having more successes in the front line. This is where measuring what is happening in the front line is not the way to measure who is winning or losing a war. At the moment, Ukraine has got the initiative just tactically at the front line. It has definitely got the initiative operationally, and strategically, I think we're in a bit of a stalemate because we're not hearing much out of the Russians wanting peace, out of the Americans trying to force peace, and President Zelensky keeps offering to sit down in anywhere but Moscow, because apparently Moscow is a little bit too dangerous. It's got too many Ukrainian drones over it. On July the 21st, Alexander Syrsky stepped down as Commander-in-Chief of Ukraine's armed forces. Taking the helm is the 43-year-old Major General General Drapatyi. He's moved up from Commander of Joint Forces. His legendary frontline status goes back to 2014 during the early battles in Mariupol. Leading a column of 72nd Mechanized Brigade armour to rescue trapped police officers, Drapatyi shouted "Go" to his driver. The driver floored the accelerator and launched their 18-ton BMP fighting vehicle clean over a metre-high barricade built by pro-Russian separatists. Footage of that flying BMP became an instant symbol of Ukrainian courage and resistance. Over a decade later, the married father of 2 takes full command of the military. Drapatyi is widely supported by frontline soldiers, veterans and government officials, and the public. He is known for speaking openly and taking personal responsibility in tough situations rather than chasing political standing. In 2022, Drapatyi led the forces that halted Russia's advance on Kryvyi Rih before liberating the west bank of Kherson. Last year, he stopped Moscow's cross-border offensive in Kharkiv, trapping Russian forces in 2 small buffer zones. And Drapatyi is also the primary architect of Ukraine's drone line doctrine. This strategy creates a continuous 15-kilometre kill zone behind the front line using uncrewed systems. With up to 90% of frontline defence relying on the drones, his mission is clear: defeat Russia's autumn campaign using rapid battlefield innovation. Now there's talk of Drapatyi's predecessor Syrsky being sacked and his predecessor Zaluzhny being sacked. This war's been going on for almost as long as the First World War. I have been in operations where I have seen commanders burnt out after 9 months, to go for a number of years where you're effectively fighting 24/7. You don't get a break. As a commander, you don't have time for a break. They're probably surviving on 2, 3, maximum 4 hours sleep a night. This will break anyone. And actually, if we see what Zaluzhny achieved, he stopped Russia from capturing Kyiv. He pushed Russia back from large territories across Ukraine. He had then achieved what he needed to achieve. It was right and proper that General Syrski came in and has been the architect of the transition of many of the Ukrainian forces from a static defence force to a manoeuvrist approach, and incorporated those changes with the technical changes that are coming in with the drone warfare and all the rest of it. But it's right and proper that before he gets overly tired, he steps back. And we then bring in a new, younger general who has got the ability to take the foundations that have been provided by his two predecessors and take those foundations and build on those for further successes in the conflict. And therefore, I do not see, and I think it is wrong to describe Syrski and Zaluzhny as being sacked. They have achieved what they needed to achieve, and it's time for them to hand over and hand the mantle to the next person so that he's got the energy, the time, the vision, and the understanding, as well as the support from elsewhere to take things forward. So that's all for today's Battle Plans Exposed. If you like what you've seen, please tell other people, send them the link, share it around, hit like, and of course subscribe. And if you've got any comments, please put them in the comments below. But I'm Philip Ingram. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.